Fighting Blindness Canada's Viewpoint is a virtual education series that brings you the latest in vision research presented by health experts from across Canada. The webinar you're about to watch is a recording. To learn more about the research we fund and upcoming webinars and events, please visit our website at fightingblindness.ca. This Viewpoint webinar is proudly presented by Bayer and supported by Abbvie, Apellis, Beacon Therapeutics, Janssen, MeriaGTx, Novartis and Roche. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and share your thoughts with us in the comment section below.
Hi, I'm Ginny Duff. I'm the moderator of this panel. Okay, so I'm a psychiatrist. I have RP myself. I was diagnosed when I was 9 years old. And for most of my childhood and young adulthood, I had about 10 degrees of 20/20 vision. And then my vision sort of started to shrink after that. And now I've got about 2 degrees of vision, 20/60. And I was just saying, I don't know if you heard me, that I'm a psychiatrist. I deal mostly with people with severe mental illness in my practice, but I have a small sideline of dealing with seeing patients who are struggling with vision loss, and I've had the honor of listening to many of their stories over the years. So I'm going to get the panel to introduce themselves. Maybe you can just give us a quick, hi, my name is, a little bit about yourself briefly and your diagnosis and maybe age of onset and what your vision is now.
Okay, thank you everyone. My name is Lisa Derencinovic. I was first diagnosed at age 4 with RP, but then re-diagnosed in my mid-20s with Bardet-Biedl syndrome, and I had a genetic diagnosis at that point. Getting the genetic diagnosis didn't really change anything in my kind of ongoing life, but it just gave more medical information to my ophthalmologist, and also for me, because with BBS, it's a syndrome, so there was more side effects that had to be checked out and made sure that everything was okay. So it's a degenerative disease, and right now I just have mainly light perception. Everything is kind of very blurry, and sometimes I can see a little shape here and there, but most of the time it's pretty gray and blurry. Was there anything else, Ginny?
I think that's it. Or maybe just a little bit about yourself, what you do and what do you do for fun?
So I am a social worker, and I have a private practice doing counseling. So I also work with people with vision loss around adjustment and the different things that can come up in terms of living with vision loss. I also do some work with Balance for Blind Adults, and I usually, on a Saturday morning, you'll find me at Achilles. I do long distance walking. I have done some running, but I am more of a walker than a runner. And other than that, I have a cat who is, my heart's desire. And I live with my sister who also has BBS. Okay.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Fraser. I also have retinitis pigmentosa. I was diagnosed at 20 years old, and the reason I found out is because my sister, who's 11 years older than me, called me one day telling me that she'd went to her optometrist and they'd found something in the back of her eye, and she said, "Can you see at night?" And I said, "Well, no, of course not. It's dark out." I didn't really realize that other people could see at night. I thought this is just the way everybody else lives. So went to the optometrist, had a very basic field of vision test, went to the ophthalmologist, and they said you had retinitis pigmentosa. And at that point, it was more, suddenly a lot more makes sense growing up, not just clumsy. I'm in my work life, I'm a project manager. I work in hospital infrastructure planning. Really, really like what I do, and kind of building healthcare of tomorrow is what I'm really passionate about. And outside of work, I love to do yoga and indoor spinning.
Hi, my name's Robin Skeates. I work as a water resources engineer in the Ontario Public Service. I have Usher syndrome type 2A. I was originally diagnosed at about the age of 25 with RP, and back then they didn't know exactly what It was just a generic term. And it basically addressed the issue of my eyesight, but didn't address the issue of my hearing. And it wasn't until a number of years later that I found out that the hearing was actually related to the condition. So both of them require an usherine protein to function properly. So in terms of fun, I like to read books. And at this point, I listen to books. So I listen to the Audible books, and I like listening to podcasts. I have vision up until about 2018. I was able to get around as a primary sense with my sight. And from 2018 till now, I'm much like Lisa. I'm just light sensitive and see a little bit of shapes and grayness and blurriness. And that's me.
Great. So the first question, maybe, and if we could be brief about it. How did you first find out about your diagnosis, and what could have made it better? What if they didn't handle it very well? What would have made it better?
So I was diagnosed, as I said, at age 4, and if you can think of a 4-year-old, I couldn't pronounce the name of my eye disease or understand what it meant. And so they gave me glasses, and it actually started because my sister had trouble reading the board when she had gone to school, and they took her to someone, and the person actually was at Skeates, and so they knew what they were looking at, and they said, well, let's look at the other one too. And it just so happened that both of us had the same eye disease. But again, for me at that point, I just knew I had to wear glasses. But I didn't understand what that meant, or, that I was visually impaired. And so it took a really long time before I started to understand that and understand what that really meant for me. I know, I don't blame my parents, but my family was in denial for a good 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes when we did find out about the diagnosis, and sometimes the doctors would be like, don't worry, they'll have problems with their vision, but they won't learn Braille. I talk sometimes in the plural because, again, it's always usually been me and my sister. They won't have to use a white cane, anything like that. And of course, both of those things happened. We were so in denial that my sister, when she was turning 16, was like, I wonder if I can drive. Just like, no. That would not be a good idea. Definitely sometimes some of those narratives didn't help, the denial that the whole family was in.
Yeah, as I said, so I was diagnosed at 20 years old, and I currently right now I just have under 20 degrees and fairly good central vision of 20/30, so I can still read without glasses and use most of my central vision. And I had a little bit more 10 years ago, but not a bit much more. I would say when I first got diagnosed, I wasn't in denial, but I was just very confused. And when they say by the time you hit your 60s or 70s, you might lose vision, I was at 20 years old. I thought that was ages away, and I would, can deal with that in another lifetime. But as I get older, I'm realizing that's something I'm going to have to deal with in the moment. So I think something that would have made it better is, at the time, getting to know people who had lived with IRDs as well. Mm-hmm. I remember getting diagnosed at Sunnybrook, and they actually sent me to Ginny, I think, in the first couple months afterwards, and I think I cried in your office that day. And looking back, I think maybe it was a little bit too soon because I hadn't really processed it. And so just kind of taking different steps at different moments to say where I am in my understanding and understanding what this means for me right now. When you have an IRD, there's so many unknowns about the future, and something I've really come to learn is just how to deal with it in the moment. So I think that's what could have made it better, is just understanding what I had to deal with at that time rather than thinking about what the next decades of my life look like.
Yeah, so I was having difficulty seeing at night in my early 20s, and then by 25, I'd done a lot of work. And today's Truth and Reconciliation Day, so a shout out to that. I was doing work volunteering in First Nations communities, building homes, and I was having difficulty seeing at night. And of course, they don't have lights in most of these rural communities, so it was very dark. So I wasn't sure if it was just me, but But I went to see an optometrist, and he said, there's something not right in there. And I went to see, he referred me to an ophthalmologist over at St. Michael's Hospital. And I still remember it to this day that he paced back and forth behind his desk, you know, talking out loud and saying to me, we don't know a lot about RP. It's a fairly new thing that we've just come up with a term for. And it's something that some people go blind from. And that's the word that stuck in my head was, what's he talking about? Like, I can see perfectly fine. I'm just having trouble seeing at night. And that sort of stayed with me through the years. And that, as I mentioned before, didn't touch on the hearing issue either. But one of the drivers for me is I have a younger brother who has the same condition. But oddly enough, his hearing is much worse and his eyesight is much better at this point. Looking back 7 years, he's in much better condition with his eyesight than I was. So that's a blessing in a little way, but it has prompted me to be much more proactive in the IRD community and to get, you know, I've resisted it for a long time because I didn't want to come to terms with the fact that I have a disability. Other than my hearing, I thought, oh, I'm pretty good. But as time passed and things got worse and worse and worse, and my vision got worse and worse and worse, I came to realize I need to be more engaged with the IRD community. So here we are today, and I'm advocating as best I can.
Great. How did the people closest to you react to your vision loss and that diagnosis?
So I sort of alluded to it a little bit before, but my family was in denial, and it was sort of like, we can, you know, if she needs any help, we can just help her. And I guess it was also because, you know, I did have central vision throughout school, but it was very much like, you know, like, we'll just help her. And so I didn't kind of identify as someone with vision loss. And so, like, not having that sort of sense of identity, I think, affected my adjustment to how, you know, I felt about my vision loss. And so it was also kind of like, when I did go through that adjustment period, I was the one who had to kind of like figure out what did that mean for my identity. But I think in terms of friends and family, like, some had good experiences and like some didn't. Some, you know, were great with sighted guides, some weren't. So it was really kind of like I had to sort of lead them in how to deal with my vision loss and sort of give them guidance on, you know, what I needed, and but also give them space to sort of, you know, kind of joke about it, and just kind of like still see me as a full person, not just like someone who's going blind.
I remember the day that we went to the ophthalmologist's office, and I was in university. I needed a new laptop at the time, and I remember going with my dad, and I remember him saying in the car about how MacBooks were a waste of money, and, you know, I could get a $200 laptop that would be just fine. And after the diagnosis, we went into the Apple store. My dad bought me a MacBook Air, and I was so excited that I could use this to my advantage, at least for a little while. So I tried to milk that as possible as I can, especially in the early days. But in terms of telling my friends and family that I'd known for a long time, especially in the beginning when you're not using a mobility device, and I think the same thing can be said for all invisible disabilities, is people don't get it, they don't really know, and sometimes they don't even really believe you. So I actually find that the friends and family and coworkers that I've known after diagnosis and they learn early on are much more, not even accepting, but they just kind of get it more. And then the friends I've known since preschool, they don't really kind of get it. And so I find actually as I go older and I'm able to tell more people as I get to know them, the process becomes a lot easier. And I think having that conversation about being proactive with like what I need help with or what I can't do, what I can't see, especially like in situations that, you know, low lighting or peripheral vision, just becoming more articulate when you don't use a mobility device, I found has been really helpful.
Yeah, I remember that moment, and it was because it was so vague. The diagnosis was so vague, and there was this vagueness even about whether or not I would go blind. When I told my family, and I was trying to think back on this, is when I told my family, it didn't really sink in because I wasn't certain about what I had just heard. So, and I was also 25 at that point. I had a young son. and I was working, and I was thinking to myself, well, there's really not much to say here, because maybe I'll go blind, maybe I won't. It's something way off, as Kate alluded to, Mary-Kate alluded to. It's somewhere off in the future, and I don't really need to worry about it right now. And I will say, by the grace of God, it's sort of like I've managed to get through my life because it's been a very slow, gradual loss. So in my case, it's just I've adapted as I've gone through. So adaptation was a big piece of it. But every step along the way has been pretty scary at different moments, from going from peripheral down to losing color to being tunnel vision, and then just basically not seeing at all, and trying to navigate. Now I'm in a whole new world of navigating. So it's a new phase of my life called the insightful journey that I'm on now. So. Yeah.
Did you try to hide your vision loss?
I don't know if I tried to hide my vision loss. I definitely think my family tried to hide my vision loss. And then I maybe took it on at that point. I know I could have started using the cane a lot earlier than I did. And I know I carried the cane in my bag for about a year. And so I could have taken that out and started using it. And I remember even just being like, we were going to a family wedding, being like, should I take my cane? And it's kind of like, why am I asking someone else? It's like, I'm the only one who can make that decision for me. But yet it was still all this like uncertainty around using the cane or not using the cane. Because I really think that is like a big decision and a big identifier. So, I felt like sometimes that affected my decision.
I definitely don't try to hide it. I try to let it more come up naturally, because I don't use a cane or a guide dog at the moment. And I had 2 pieces of advice that I was actually given by other members of the FBC community that I've met at Young Leaders events. Just a little shout out for that. The first one is that if somebody asks about it and it comes up naturally, is if they want to ask questions about it, give it 5 to 10 minutes, because people are curious, but you don't want to make that your entire personality. And the second piece would be, for me, what comes up, especially at work, sometimes it comes a lot when people ask about driving, like, because I work in the suburbs, and so people say, how did you get here? I'll typically say, I don't drive, I have an eye condition. And that second piece of advice that I was given is try not to be too medicalized with people who don't necessarily understand vision loss, because if I go into, the retina has, rods and cones, and that the people don't usually get it, so you try, or it's sometimes beneficial to use where it's like, I have low vision, or I don't see at night, or sometimes I have a genetic condition where I don't see in this particular scenario. People can grasp that a lot better, so I've tried to be more talk in layman's terms when it comes to people, if and when it has to come up. And I find, especially when you have low vision, people figure it out one way or another.
The answer is yes and no. By and large, I don't think I tried to hide it throughout my life. If I did so, going back to the last question too, I probably hid it more from my family, just because they didn't really start to get it until they started seeing me using the cane or seeing me walk slowly and those types of things. So I'd say yes and no, because I wasn't, as Mary-Kate was saying, I wasn't trying to avoid the subject or not talk about it. But at the same time, on a professional front, I was concerned about, the employer taking concern as to me having more needs than other people. So I was very careful in the professional environment throughout my career until the point where I actually needed to do an accommodation at work, because as an engineer, I was reading blueprints, and I was getting to the point where I literally was using magnifiers and all sorts of different tools to read the blueprints, and I said, I can't do this anymore. So I then asked for an accommodation and moved into an engineering role that was more about program development and more in the policy implementation side of things and communications. So and getting more involved in the technical side of things.
So I hid my vision. I went to great lengths to hide it. my vision problems. And I think that had to do with trying to be accepted by my peer group, of course, and of course going to university and trying to date. And, so not only was there the concern about could I get a job and would the employer be upset, but would my peer group accept me? And, there were some very painful moments in my life that I could have done without. So the one story I've always told, which was going to the high school ball, and I got invited by this guy, and I got my corsage and my dress and everything, and we're going to a restaurant beforehand, and I went with my parents to that restaurant the day before and memorized the floor plan of the restaurant and where the washrooms were, and I made it through the dinner. And I had a bit of a laugh when my date was driving into the club. It was the Granite Club, and he went in the out exit, and I thought, okay, I've got one on him now. But eventually the whole thing broke down, and at one point I said, I've got to talk to you, and he thought I'd broken the heel on my shoe. I mean, it was just mortifying. So this is not something I recommend, and just to finish the story, last summer I was visiting some friends, and they said, "Oh, we've gotten invited to this house, and they're gonna whatever." Turned out it was him. So I said to him, "We've met before," and he went, "Oh, well, how's that?" And I said, "I went with you to the Havergal Ball." And it was terrible. Anyway, poor guy. He'd felt guilty for years and years. And I told him that I was the one who should feel guilty because I put him in this terrible place. Anyway, so this is not to be recommended, the extent to which I went hiding my... Then when I was in medical school, I remember one day, there was this class that I was always late for, and they always turned the lights off, and they had slideshows, and I was always like stumbling to my seat. And I had a white cane, which I kept in my purse, like Lisa. And I said to my friend, maybe I should use my white cane for that class. And she said, "Oh, don't do that, Ginny. Everyone will freak out." So, just don't, advice is cheap. And so my next question is, how did you come out of the closet? And which might be relevant to some of the people on the panel, maybe some others not, but certainly was relevant in my life.
So I would say my last year of high school, I had to write an English essay where you read 2 books and then wrote an essay. And at that point, my vision was that I had to read basically the book pressed against my nose. It took me about the first semester. It was around Christmas when I finished reading the first book. And my teacher was like, look, we can give you accommodations, but there's not enough time for you to read the second book at the same pace. So never mind write the essay and finish the course. So I had to get a computer with JAWS, with a scanner, with Kurzweil, and it was all like quite the shock and quite the steep learning curve. And I don't think I really got that comfortable with it. But I made it through and, finished high school. And then I was going to U of T, the St. George campus, which if people aren't familiar with it, it's downtown with lots of dark historical buildings. And as we've all said, being in the dark is hard for IRD people. And so I knew I wouldn't be able to get around by myself. And, at high school, you just kind of follow the flow of people. Maybe if you step on someone's feet, well, you're seen as like the rude person, but whatever. So it's like, okay, I have to be able to get around by myself. I have to take the subway from Scarborough to downtown. I need to use the white cane. So I think I called CNIB, it was still called CNIB at that point, in tears, being like, it's August and I'm going to school in September at U of T and I need to use the white cane. Gracefully enough, I was given an O&M instructor. It was actually Sue Marshwoods, and Sue helped me learn how to use the white cane and, start feeling comfortable with it. And but it was interesting because then when I started university, I was Lisa the blind girl because, I had the white cane and I was meeting people for the first time. So it was just sort of interesting there was that shift in identity, and people sort of like gave me that label before I had even sort of fully accepted it or fully sort of like understood how I was going to interact with that label for myself.
Yeah, as I said before, I usually tell people if and when it needs to come up. Oftentimes it's about, conversation starts when we talk about driving, but for other scenarios, I can think of two. An example, I was at work and I used dark mode and a large font, and when your cursor is big, bright, and green in the middle of the screen, and I was starting a new job, and someone came up behind me and said, "Why on earth does your screen look like that?" and started laughing. And I said, "Oh, I have a genetic eye condition." And I could just see the discomfort on his face, and everybody else in the room got comfortable, and I just thought, it's not on me. Your discomfort is not on me. And then I remember being at an event one time, and someone professional went out to go and shake my hand, and of course it wasn't in my field of vision, so I was just standing there, and he had his hand out for about 5 minutes, and then someone else, I think one of my coworkers, said like, "Oh, she can't see it," and again he felt uncomfortable about it. And I would say the one thing I've learned is other people's discomfort is one I don't usually know, so I'm ignorant to it, but it's not mine to deal with, and as long as I'm happy and comfortable myself in the way I'm telling people, I've learned that that's the most important thing to me.
Yeah, I would define my moment of quote unquote coming out as being walking through Union Station just shortly after I had another drop in my vision. It would be like a plateau and then a drop, a plateau and then drop. And I would walk through Union Station, and then all of a sudden people would magically and horrifyingly appear in front of me. Just like, whoa, where did they come from? Whoa, they were coming from left and right. And I said, okay, now is the time when I need to start using a cane. And my primary reason for using the cane in the beginning was to tell other people, listen, I've got vision loss. So that's why I did that. And my wife and I were discussing this. And of course, the second part of that is about accepting that you have vision loss and actually training to use your cane. I am just learning to actually get formal training on my cane on how to get around with it now. And it's one of my regrets that I didn't do it sooner. But I just point that out to people to know that, because even though you have a cane out there, I still found that people would walk into you. It's like a moth drawn to a flame. People just walk into you. And the worst people are the diagonalers. They come across on a diagonal, they're looking at their iPhone, you're doing everything possible to keep your eyes open for them, you're 100% present, and they're bopping to their music and they're looking at their iPhone, and you step right on them, or you elbow them, or you knock them down. And I felt really badly when that happened. It didn't happen often, but when it did happen, I often felt, it would often feel really badly, but I thought, listen, I got to be present 100% of the time in public. The least you can do is don't go on autopilot and assume someone else is looking out for you. So that's my little feedback.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just combine the last two questions. What have you learned over the years that you would want people to know, just like a highlight? Pearls of wisdom, I guess, from you, and if any mistakes that you've made that you'd like other people to learn from.
So I definitely think I could have started using my white cane earlier. I think that would have definitely, changed things and made an impact. But I think it's also giving yourself permission to, this is your journey, and, if you weren't ready to use the cane, sometimes you're not going to use it even if it's given to you, and, you're going to put it in your purse. So no matter how much we try and do things as best we can, this is tough. And so, sometimes we need to be gentle with ourselves and be forgiving and compassionate with ourselves as well. One shout out to the parents, because I know a lot of times with IRDs, it's parents who come to these conferences. I know my parents had a lot of guilt about my genetic eye disease, and I always, try to sort of reassure them. It's like, you couldn't have done anything. It's like, just because I got an eye disease is also because I'm tall and have curly hair. So it's not anything that you could have controlled. And, but, I think that was something that I really kind of noticed that stayed with them for a long time. So, like sometimes ourselves as the person with the IRD needs some help, and sometimes getting counseling can be really helpful, but sometimes also our family members need help and go through their own grieving process too. So I just want to acknowledge that, because I know there's other people than just the people with the IRD in the room.
I just want to, thank you for that. That's important. Just my experience listening to people's stories is that most people who use a white cane will say that they should have used it earlier, probably even 5 years earlier, and mostly starting to use a white cane is kind of the beginning of some freedom from the restrictions that the vision loss brings us. Okay, sorry, next.
The one thing that I've learned, and the one piece of advice, is actually something that Ginny told me when I first came to see her, and I didn't listen to for about 5 years, and that is get to know other peoples who live with an IRD. When my sister and I got diagnosed, we didn't know anybody else, and then we came to Viewpoint, and then I went to fight young leaders and the mentorship program. And when you have an IRD, especially at 20 years old, and they tell you this is what's going to look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you start thinking, how am I going to live my life? And at that point I thought, well, maybe I might have to not work as long, or I might have to only do a desk job, or I might only have to live my life a certain way or do these specific activities. And then you go to these events, and then you meet people who are at later stages of their condition, and you see that they're professional athletes, they're chefs, they're lawyers, they have children, they have homes, and then you kind of get this, oh, life is normal. And it just gives you a little bit more relief, and that you'll figure this out one day, and also you have a network and community members to look out to. Robin and I are actually paired up in the FBC mentorship program, and we've had a few great chats over the years. So just having other people to look to who've been in the similar situations and know that you're not, the only one dealing with it has been really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Kate. I guess looking back on it, with respect to the last question, I sort of reframe it. I don't see it as having made mistakes. I see it more as having made choices, and what were the consequences of the choices that were made. So from that perspective, I think I made the choices that I made when I needed to make them, and I'm quite content. I don't have regrets looking back. Maybe a couple of whimsical moments where I wish I'd maybe used that cane 5 years earlier. But other than that, in terms of things that I've learned, one of the great gifts that I got from some people that were basically born since birth or lost their sight in infancy or very, very young children is they don't see themselves as being disabled. And they can even take things as being, I was part of a patient advocacy group for a pharmaceutical company. And we have one person on there who was actually a scientist who had Leber's congenital amaurosa. And she was quite adamant that the name of our organization, which was Patient and Caretaker Advisory Committee, she took great offense to the word caretaker, because she says, I don't have a caretaker. I don't need someone to look after me. She goes, I'm quite capable and quite normal. And the biggest problem that I've seen, and the gift that I've gotten from the 2 or 3 people that I've met that have been completely blind, is that they're perfectly fine. They're not disabled in their views, and I would agree with them. The challenge that they face is that the world that is built around them has not taken them into consideration. So it's really the able-sighted people that have actually impeded their ability to be part of society more closely by not taking into consideration infrastructure, urban planning, and those types of things that would be more inclusive. And that would be the biggest thing that I've learned, is that we need to be doing a heck of a lot better job with building codes and building our societies to include people that have challenges on many fronts.
So I'm just going to talk about some pearls of wisdom. Hopefully I can have a little bit more time to do that. Originally, we had on the questions a question about your relationship to hope. And I wanted to talk about that. I think it's it's important that you don't put all your eggs in the cure basket. And I think this is particularly important for parents. I think your child needs to know that you love them the way they are, and that if they don't get a cure, that's still okay. And they don't. And if a cure comes along, fabulous. If it doesn't, you don't want your child feeling that their life's been a tragedy in your eyes. Nobody wants to be somebody else's tragedy.
Can I just add?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I often get asked that when I do counseling. People ask me, do you have hope that you're going to get your sight back? And I usually tell them, I have hope that I'm going to live a great life, and I have hope that I'm going to be happy and fulfilled. But right now, no, I don't have hope that I'm going to get my sight back, but that's okay. And because I don't have hope doesn't mean that the other people, I can affect their connection to hope. But again, as Ginny said, it's not waiting and living your life and living in the hope of living your life with vision loss. And I will very willingly be surprised, when I do get my treatment and my cure. But it's just different how it affects you in your day-to-day.
So I think, the hope should be that our children, or those of us with vision loss, live fulfilled, happy, productive lives. And if a cure comes along, that's terrific. But if it doesn't, we don't want at the end of the day to say, wow, I was sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for a cure that never came. If you're new to this world of vision loss, my pearl of wisdom is don't assume that you know anything about what it's like to live with vision loss, because you don't. It's a fairly rare thing. If you think about who do you know with vision loss, it's probably not very many people until you've come here. And so as Mary-Kate said, I always say, yes, I meet other people with vision loss and learn about what successful blind people, how they live their lives. I sort of have come to think of getting yourself organized as a person with vision loss as being a sort of second adolescence. So, when we're adolescents, a normal adolescent, how do they figure out what they want to be when they grow up? They find role models. And there are plenty of role models all over the place on TV, in their private, personal life, school, teachers, whatever. How do you want to be as a visually impaired person or a blind person when you grow up? And how do you figure that out? And searching out role models is, to me, is really a critical thing, so that you can imagine what it will be like to be a successful blind person. You want to find the successful ones. Don't just stick with, oh my God, I've seen this person and I don't want to be like that. There are successful blind people, and I think that some of us are sitting at this table. The National Federation of the Blind in the States, their tagline I really quite like. They say, "Don't let blindness be the characteristic that defines you. Don't let low expectations get between you and your dreams." So the National Federation, I think they're great. They run these wild camps. They teach blind people how to run chainsaws. So, they do not have low expectations, and there are people out there doing outrageous things. I'm not going to take the chainsaw course myself. But, I think that it's important to kind of blow out of the water any low expectations that you have about what people can do. All right. And I tell my patients, you can do basically whatever you want to do. You just need to do things differently. You're not going to be an airline pilot, though. But I'm a downhill skier. I'm a sailor. I ride a tandem bike. I went to medical school. There are lots of things that you can do, but you just need to do them differently. You need to be creative. Okay, my list. One should never be visually impaired and have to read a list of. Okay. One more. Okay. All right. And I guess, I think the most important thing, well, two things. Keep yourself physically active. It's only your eyes that don't work. It's not the rest of your body. So, and beware of the insidious and destructive element of shame. It's really very destructive, leads us to hide. I've told you, a little bit about my story. But yeah, don't fall into that trap. We all do, but don't do that. And I'll leave it open to questions now.
So I did a terrible job timekeeping because I was just mesmerized by what was happening on the stage and all of this wonderful stories that were being shared. So we do have time for one question. If anyone has a question. All right, I saw Jim here in the front. Jim gets the lucky question.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. So myself and my colleague here, Leslie, are on the board of directors of the Canadian Council of the Blind, and I thank you guys for sharing your inspirational stories. Thank you.